Most people don't set out to destroy their own lives, but the road to ruin is paved with tiny, almost imperceptible steps. The idea that our downfall comes not with a sudden, dramatic fall but through the gradual accumulation of small decisions is a truth that resonates deeply in the intricate labyrinth of human relationships. There is a brutal, unspoken reality hidden within the dynamics of marital life that many never anticipate, a slow descent into a state of inner disintegration that starts with seemingly insignificant choices and quiet concessions. The human heart, in its intricate vulnerability, finds itself seduced by the allure of fleeting attention, a reminder of earlier, more passionate times when every smile and conversation felt like a step toward rediscovering a lost self. In the midst of a stable marriage, where promises and routines weave together to create a tapestry of security and familiarity, there sometimes exists a quiet void that even the most affectionate partner cannot fully fill. Often, women who have dedicated themselves wholly to the roles of wife, mother, and caregiver begin to feel that the vibrant individual they once were is slowly slipping away beneath the weight of expectations. Their identities start to blur, merging into the collective we of the family, and in that process, the individual spark that once defined them begins to dim. Over time, the late-night conversations that used to vibrate with secrets, dreams, and laughter give way to discussions bound by practicality, schedules, bills, and mundane household chores. In this transition, the sense of being noticed as an individual becomes rare, and the craving for validation grows ever more desperate, setting the stage for dangerous, yet almost imperceptible, shifts in behavior. In the quiet moments of introspection, when the steady rhythm of daily life slows to a lull, the lure of external validation can seem almost irresistible. There exists a psychological process often described as the slow erosion of boundaries, a subtle, incremental slipping of the moral and emotional guard that defines one's inner sanctum. Experts in psychology have long noted that the human brain is highly adept at rationalizing behavior that it knows, at some deep level, is contrary to its established beliefs. This phenomenon, known as cognitive dissonance, plays a central role in the gradual justification of actions that might, on their surface, appear harmless but ultimately unravel the foundational strands of a committed relationship. A stolen compliment here, a lingering glance there, or a text message that arrives just at the right moment can ignite a spark that lights the fuse of self-deception. As the mind clings to these small justifications, each seemingly insignificant moment builds upon the last until the realization hits, a time when one looks in the mirror and barely recognizes the person who stares back. It is not that these actions are taken with a clear, deliberate intent to betray everything that has been built over years of dedication and hard work. Rather, they start as a quiet whisper of dissent against the suffocating normalcy of daily life, a desperate bid for a feeling long forgotten, the rush of being desired, the gentle thrill of being seen as valuable again. This desire for validation is not necessarily about a lack of love or an inherent weakness. It is more a reflection of the complex needs and vulnerabilities that define the human experience. When the excitement of novelty and the affirmation of desire come together, they form a potent cocktail that can temporarily dissolve the self-imposed boundaries of fidelity. The danger lies not in the overt, dramatic acts of betrayal, but in the subtle shift of priorities. In the early stages of an emotional infidelity, the acts themselves are often cloaked in the innocuous language of harmless interaction. A friendly conversation might seem benign, a text exchange may appear trivial, and a casual meeting can be rationalized as nothing more than friendly contact. Yet, these interactions, when accumulated over weeks, months, or even years, form an intricate web of deception that is as binding as it is destructive. The very nature of these interactions serves to blur the clear delineations of what is acceptable within a committed relationship. What starts as an innocent dialogue frequently transforms into a confessional space where personal feelings and vulnerabilities are shared more freely with someone who is not the primary partner. Over time, the emotional connection deepens, providing the individual with a sense of affirmation that was once solely, albeit insufficiently, provided by her spouse. One of the most striking elements of this emotional journey is how the mind manages to reconcile the conflicting realities of commitment and desire. In many cases, a married woman who engages in such interactions does not see herself as a traitor. Instead, she begins to layer her actions with justifications that shield her from the weight of guilt. She may convince herself that a compliment from a stranger is simply a moment of harmless attention, or that a late-night conversation is merely an expression of her need to feel heard and appreciated. This rationalization process is both subtle and insidious. It works by reframing every transgression as a corrective measure, a way to compensate for the neglect and indifference felt in the confines of her home. When feelings of invisibility and insignificance take root, Any form of acknowledgement, even if it comes at the cost of fidelity, can seem like a necessary reprieve from the crushing solitude that has gradually set in. The allure of external validation can be further explained by what some psychologists refer to as the Coolidge effect. In essence, this phenomenon describes the way in which novelty can spur an intense surge of desire, especially in environments that have grown stagnant and predictable. When every day mirrors the last, even a brief encounter with someone who offers a glimpse of unpredictability can feel electrifying. It is not a matter of abandoning love or loyalty outright. It is about the desperate longing to feel alive, to experience the adrenaline rush that accompanies the uncertainty of a new connection. In this sense, the pursuit of emotional or physical attention becomes less about the other person and more about reclaiming a lost piece of oneself. In the subtle interplay between longing and fulfillment, a married woman might find herself inching closer to the edge, each act of flirtation serving as both a rebellion against a monotonous life and a longing for a revival of her youthful, confident self. Compounding this inner turmoil is the profound sense of identity loss that often accompanies long-term marriages. In the early chapters of a relationship, a woman might have been celebrated as an independent, vibrant individual, someone with dreams, ambitions, and a personal narrative that stood apart from her role as a partner or parent. However, with time, these unique attributes can be overshadowed by the responsibilities and expectations that come with marriage. Society, and sometimes even one's own partner, begins to see her primarily through the lens of her roles: the devoted wife, the nurturing mother, the reliable caretaker. This transition, while natural in many respects, can leave a lingering void where her previous identity once thrived. The yearning to reconnect with that lost version of herself can prompt her to seek out interactions that remind her of who she used to be, a person of substance, allure, and independence. What may begin as a harmless conversation with a stranger gradually evolves into a deeper connection, one that promises not only validation but also a fleeting sense of empowerment. The once gentle flirtation morphs into an emotional affair, where every shared secret and every whispered compliment chips away at the once steadfast foundation of marital fidelity. The process of self-justification reaches a critical juncture when the mind begins to accept these extramarital interactions as a necessary part of personal survival. In this state, every action is carefully rationalized, and every moment of pleasure is cloaked in the comforting guise of self-care. A woman might tell herself that, after years of emotional labor and unacknowledged sacrifice, she deserves to feel desired, even if it means stepping away from the boundaries that once defined her. This is not a decision born out of malice or a deliberate intention to hurt, but rather one that evolves from the complex interplay of unresolved emotional needs and the human tendency to seek out affirmation in all the wrong places. With each small transgression, the moral boundaries that once seemed unassailable start to blur, until the actions themselves no longer register as betrayals but as acts of personal redemption. As this gradual erosion continues, there comes a point where the defense mechanisms that once shielded her from the full impact of her actions finally buckle under their own weight. What was once a series of isolated incidents becomes a pattern, a daily routine of small justifications that, when accumulated, form an unbreakable chain binding her away from the man she once loved. This chain is forged in the quiet hours of the night, when the mind is left to wrestle with the conflicting sensations of guilt and satisfaction. The thrill of the new and the comfort of a long-familiar routine merge into a dangerous cocktail that leaves little room for reflection. Soon, even the notion of ending the affair is accompanied by a cascade of excuses. The promise that it will soon end, the belief that it is simply a phase born out of temporary loneliness, and the hope that nothing substantial will ever come of it. In this state of emotional intoxication, the reality of the situation becomes obscured by a fog of self-deception, making it increasingly difficult to gauge where one ending and another beginning. In time, a decisive moment arrives. The threshold at which the cumulative effect of repeated choices transforms into a fundamental shift in perspective. It is as if the act of crossing that invisible line irrevocably alters the course of one's life, rendering previous understandings of loyalty and love obsolete. At this juncture, the emotional connection nurtured outside the marriage begins to eclipse what remains of the marital bond, and the once clear boundaries fade into a hazy gradient of competing affections. A woman may still harbor feelings of affection for her husband, but they become entangled with a parallel, equally potent connection to the other man, one that feels more immediate, more validating, and ultimately more fulfilling. Even if the physical act of betrayal has not yet taken place, the heart and mind have already made their choice, setting into motion a slow and irreversible shift that leaves little hope for reclaiming what was once lost. In the midst of this internal struggle, there is often a quiet voice that insists that nothing will ever change, that this fleeting taste of passion, no matter how transient, is worth the price of admission. This voice, rational and persuasive in its own right, convinces the heart that the sacrifices made in the name of duty and responsibility were never truly fulfilling in the first place. The heart clings to the memory of a time when every look, every whisper, and every touch carried the promise of renewal, a promise that, in the cold light of day, is continually denied by the drudgery of routine and the burdens of obligation. In seeking out the excitement of external validation, the woman is not merely trying to escape from an unremarkable reality, she is attempting to resurrect a part of herself that has long lain dormant, a part that knew the intoxicating joy of feeling truly seen and appreciated. Yet as each small transgression accumulates, the transformation is so gradual that it often goes unnoticed until it is too late to reverse course. The defenses that were once so strong have crumbled under the ceaseless pressure of accumulated guilt and suppressed desires, leaving in their place a person who no longer seems to know herself. The quiet thrill of a stolen glance or a whispered secret slowly replaces the deep, enduring bond that once sustained her marriage. At this point, every smile, every kind word from the other man becomes an affirmation of her worth, a worth that she desperately feels has been eroded away by the steady march of neglect and indifference. She begins to view herself through an altered lens, one that justifies every secret smile and every subtle act of rebellion. The boundaries, once firmly drawn in her mind, have now become fluid, allowing her to rationalize choices that her conscious self once would have condemned. What ensues is a cascade of consequences that reach far beyond the individual, affecting not only the marriage but also the very fabric of the life she has built. The emotional affair, initially cloaked in the innocence of a fleeting interaction, becomes a full-blown entanglement that redefines her understanding of love and commitment. It is a slow transformation fueled by the belief that one deserves something more, that the sacrifices made over the years should eventually yield the revival of a lost self. In this process, the line between right and wrong blurs to the extent that betrayal is no longer seen as an act of malice, but rather as a form of self-preservation. This internal justification creates a feedback loop where each further act of betrayal is not only easier to commit but is also met with a deep-seated conviction that it is, in some twisted sense, deserved. The real tragedy of this gradual disintegration is that it often goes unnoticed until the accumulated weight of secrets and suppressed emotions becomes unbearable. What started as a series of inconsequential moments, each barely noticeable on its own, builds into an irreversible journey away from the person one once was. The once vibrant connection that defined a loving marriage is replaced by an elusive mirage of passion that, while it may promise renewal in fleeting moments, ultimately leaves a trail of irreversible damage. In this state, the woman finds herself in a paradoxical existence, caught between the comfortable familiarity of routine and the exhilarating pull of something new, something that promises a return to the vibrant, confident self that seems all but lost. It is at this point that the realization dawns, a haunting clarity that, despite all her efforts, the journey toward rediscovery has come at an unsustainable cost. The gradual erosion of commitment, masked by a series of small justifications and rationalizations, eventually creates an impasse from which there is no return. When a woman reaches this point, the walls of her old life begin to crumble, revealing the remnants of a self that she no longer recognizes. Each interaction, once brushed aside as inconsequential, now stands as a testament to the slow, insidious process of self-destruction that has led her away from the life she once cherished. And in that moment of revelation, when the weight of all those accumulated choices bears down on her, she is forced to confront the stark reality that the road she has traveled was paved with moments that, individually, seemed so trivial. The narrative of self-deception is thus both haunting and tragically familiar, a cautionary tale of how easily the mind can bend reality in its quest for solace and self-affirmation. In the end, it is not the overt act of betrayal that severs the ties of a marriage, but the quiet, relentless undermining of its foundation through countless, seemingly innocent choices. The heart, once a repository of deep loyalty and love, gradually succumbs to the lure of fleeting validation until it can no longer distinguish between the love it once knew and the passion that now promises an escape from mediocrity. And so, in the delicate interplay between memory, emotion, and desire, the truth emerges, that the journey to ruin is neither dramatic nor immediate. It is the cumulative result of small, almost imperceptible steps that, when added together, lead a person away from the life they once vowed to preserve. In the quiet aftermath of these choices, the reality remains that a woman who has allowed herself to be lured away by external attention is not inherently weak or immoral. She is simply human, driven by the need to feel seen, desired, and whole in a world that too often reduces her to roles and responsibilities. The allure of a moment of connection, of feeling valued beyond the expected confines of duty, proves to be a potent antidote to the numbness that seeps into a long-standing routine. And though the journey may begin with mere whispers of self-doubt and the faint hope of rediscovering a lost spark, it invariably cascades into a profound transformation, one that, by its very nature, is both irreversible and profoundly tragic. There is a deep irony in the fact that the desire to reclaim a piece of one's former self can ultimately lead to a complete redefinition of that self. A metamorphosis that, while initially filled with hope and possibility, ultimately leaves behind only remnants of the person who once stood proudly in the light of unconditional love and unwavering commitment. Yet, even in the midst of this transformation, there remains a quiet power in understanding the process, a power that lies in the ability to see the signs long before they converge into a moment of no return. In recognizing the subtle shifts, the stolen moments of intimacy, the carefully constructed justifications, the slow but steady drifting away from a life once cherished, one gains a clarity that is both bitter and liberating. Ultimately, the journey is a testament to the resilience of human nature, to the capacity of the heart to both love fiercely and betray unwittingly. It is a narrative written not in bold, dramatic strokes, but in the soft, insistent lines of everyday life, lines that, once crossed, forever alter the landscape of one's emotions and relationships. And as each day passes, the consequences of those choices become ever more inescapable, leaving behind a trail of memories, regrets, and irrevocable changes that speak to the power of desire and the fragility of what it means to truly belong. In this unyielding pursuit of connection and validation, the realization eventually sets in that love, in its truest form, demands more than mere fleeting moments of passion. It requires the courage to face the inevitable vulnerabilities of being seen and known in totality, a courage that, once lost, is not easily reclaimed. And so the story continues, a quiet chronicle of human fallibility and strength, a narrative that reminds us that the subtle interplay of desire and duty can lead us down paths we never intended to take. With each small concession, with every justified moment of escape, the tapestry of a life once built on steadfast commitment begins to unravel, leaving behind a poignant reminder that the path to ruin is rarely marked by grand gestures, but by the quiet, relentless accumulation of tiny, nearly invisible choices that alter the course of a life forever. The understanding of this slow deterioration carries with it a profound lesson, a lesson that speaks to the very nature of human desire and the constant search for meaning, connection, and ultimately, redemption. In recognizing that even the smallest steps can lead us astray, we are empowered to approach our relationships with a renewed sense of awareness and responsibility. And while the allure of that brief, exhilarating escape may be powerful, it is tempered by the realization that true fulfillment lies not in the transient thrill of a forbidden encounter, but in the deep, sometimes challenging commitment to rebuilding what has been overlooked. In the end, it is the incremental shifts, the tiny moments of self-deception and rationalization, that hold the power to reshape a life, leaving behind both the promise of renewal and the haunting echo of all that has been lost.